Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm an emergency medical technician with Denver Metro Ambulance Service in Colorado. Or at least I was until I turned in my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Sarah Chen if you want. Though most people on my crew just called me Chen during my 8 years running calls across the Front Range. I've seen everything you can imagine in emergency medical services. Heart attacks, car crashes, overdoses, shootings, and every kind of medical emergency the human body can produce. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what happens in between. It ultimately led me to hang up my radio for good. Denver Metro covers over 600 square miles of urban and suburban territory, from the mountains to the plains. We're a busy service that runs approximately 80,000 calls per year out of 12 stations scattered across the metro area. During my time there, I worked primarily out of Station 7, which serves the northern suburbs and handles everything from routine medical transports to high-priority trauma calls. I loved the unpredictability of the job. 1 minute, you're helping an elderly woman who's fallen in her bathroom. The next, you're racing Code 3 to a multi-vehicle accident on the interstate. The night of March 3, 2024, started like any other Saturday evening shift. My partner, Jake Morrison, and I had been working together for almost 2 years, and we had that kind of seamless teamwork that only develops after hundreds of calls together. Jake was a paramedic with 15 years of experience, the kind of guy who could start an IV in the back of a moving ambulance while eating a sandwich. I handled most of the driving and assisted with patient care, but Jake was definitely the medical expert on our team. We had been on duty since 6 p.m., and by 11:30 that night, we'd already run 6 calls. Nothing too serious. A diabetic emergency that resolved quickly, a minor fender bender with no injuries, an elderly man with chest pain that turned out to be heartburn, and a few other routine transports. Saturday nights in Denver usually mean a steady stream of alcohol-related incidents, domestic disputes, and the occasional overdose. But this particular evening had been surprisingly calm. We were restocking our ambulance at Station 7 when the tones dropped at 11:47 p.m. The dispatcher's voice crackled through our radio with the kind of urgency that immediately gets your attention. Unit 714, respond priority 1 to 2847 Maple Street for an unresponsive female, approximately 28 years old. CPR in progress by family members. Cross streets are Maple and 15th Avenue. Jake and I exchanged glances as we quickly secured our equipment and jumped into the front seats. An unresponsive 28-year-old with CPR already in progress meant we were potentially dealing with a full cardiac arrest and someone who should be in the prime of their life. These calls always hit different than working on elderly patients where cardiac events are more expected. "What do you think?" I asked Jake as I started the engine and activated our emergency lights and siren. "Could be anything at that age," he replied, checking his drug bag and monitor. "Overdose, cardiac arrhythmia, anaphylaxis, trauma. We'll know more when we get there." The address was in a quiet residential neighborhood about 8 minutes from our station. As we navigated through the late-night traffic, Jake contacted dispatch for any additional information about the call. The dispatcher confirmed that family members had called 911 after finding the patient unresponsive in her bedroom. They had started CPR based on instructions from the 911 operator, but no other details were available. We arrived at 2847 Maple Street at 11:55 p.m. It was a modest 2-story house in a neighborhood of similar homes, most with their lights off for the night. The front porch light was on, and I could see a man in his 50s pacing frantically in the doorway, clearly watching for our arrival. As soon as we pulled up, he ran toward our ambulance. "She's upstairs," he called out before we had even gotten out of the vehicle. "Please hurry, my daughter isn't breathing." Jake and I grabbed our equipment and followed the man, who introduced himself as Robert Martinez, into the house. The living room was filled with family members, most of them crying or speaking in hushed, worried tones. An older woman who appeared to be Robert's wife was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. "This way," Robert said, leading us up a narrow staircase to the second floor. She was supposed to come down for dinner around 7, but when she didn't show up, we thought she was just tired from work. She's been putting in long hours at her new job. When we went to check on her around 11, we found her like this. We entered a small bedroom at the end of the hallway. The room was neat and simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and small desk. On the bed, a young Hispanic woman was lying on her back while a teenage boy, who looked to be her younger brother, was performing chest compressions. His technique wasn't perfect, but he was maintaining a decent rhythm and appeared to be pushing hard enough to be effective. "I'm Jake, and this is Sarah," my partner announced as we set down our equipment. "You're doing a great job, but we're going to take over now." The teenager stepped back, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face flushed from exertion. "I learned CPR in health class," he said, breathing heavily. "Is she going to be okay?" Jake moved to the patient's head while I positioned myself beside her torso to take over compressions. The woman appeared to be exactly as described, around 28 years old, with long dark hair and olive skin. She was wearing jeans and a light blue sweater, and there were no obvious signs of trauma or injury. "What's her name?" I asked Robert while Jake checked for a pulse and began assessing her airway. "Elena. Elena Martinez. She's my oldest daughter." Jake placed his fingers on Elena's carotid artery and shook his head. "No pulse," he confirmed. "Sarah, start compressions while I get the monitor set up." I positioned my hands on Elena's chest and began performing CPR, pushing hard and fast at the center of her breastbone. Her chest wall felt normal under my hands. No unusual resistance or abnormal findings that would suggest internal injuries. As I worked, Jake quickly attached the cardiac monitor leads to Elena's chest to check her heart rhythm. "What's her medical history?" Jake asked while preparing to insert an advanced airway. "Any known heart problems, drug use, allergies, medications?" "Nothing," Robert replied, his voice breaking slightly. "She's always been perfectly healthy. Never even broke a bone as a kid. She doesn't do drugs, barely drinks alcohol. She just started a new job as a marketing coordinator downtown about 6 months ago." The cardiac monitor showed a flat line, indicating no electrical activity in Elena's heart. This was asystole, often called flatline, and it's one of the most difficult cardiac rhythms to reverse. Jake inserted an endotracheal tube to secure Elena's airway while I continued chest compressions. "How long was she down before you started CPR?" I asked, maintaining the rhythm of compressions while Jake prepared medications. "We don't know exactly," Robert admitted. "Like I said, she was supposed to come down for dinner at 7, but we didn't want to bother her. When we finally checked on her at 11, she was already cold to the touch." That was concerning news. If Elena had been in cardiac arrest for potentially 4 hours before CPR was started, her chances of meaningful recovery were extremely poor. Brain cells begin dying within minutes of losing oxygen, and after such an extended period, even if we could restart her heart, the neurological damage would likely be severe and irreversible. Jake established intravenous access and administered epinephrine, the primary drug used in cardiac arrest situations. We worked in sync, with me providing continuous chest compressions while Jake managed her airway and administered medications according to advanced cardiac life support protocols. "Let's get her downstairs and into the truck," Jake said after our initial round of medications. "We need to transport her to Denver General immediately." Moving a patient in full cardiac arrest down a narrow staircase while maintaining CPR is one of the most challenging aspects of pre-hospital care. We used a specialized device called a mechanical CPR machine that would provide continuous chest compressions while we navigated the stairs and loaded Elena into our ambulance. The family gathered around as we prepared to transport Elena. Her mother was crying softly while her father and brother followed us outside. "Can we ride with you?" Robert asked. "One family member can ride up front," Jake replied. "The rest of you should follow us to the hospital. We'll be going to Denver General Emergency Department." Robert climbed into the passenger seat while I drove, and Jake continued working on Elena in the back of the ambulance. The mechanical CPR device provided consistent compressions while Jake administered additional medications and monitored her cardiac rhythm. During the 15-minute transport to Denver General, Jake radioed ahead to the emergency department to give them a report on Elena's condition. Denver General, this is Metro 714, with a 28-year-old female in full cardiac arrest. Downtime unknown, potentially several hours. Currently in a systole, CPR in progress with mechanical device. We've given 2 rounds of EPI, established advanced airway, ETA 3 minutes. The emergency department was ready for us when we arrived. Dr. Amanda Foster, whom I had worked with many times over the years, met us at the ambulance with a full resuscitation team. They quickly transferred Elena to a trauma bay, where the hospital team took over her care. Dr. Foster continued the resuscitation efforts for another 45 minutes, following every protocol and trying every intervention available. They administered additional medications, checked for reversible causes of cardiac arrest, and even attempted external pacing to try to stimulate Elena's heart. But despite their best efforts, Elena remained in a systole with no signs of life. At 1:23 a.m., after nearly 2 hours of continuous CPR and advanced life support measures, Dr. Foster made the decision to terminate resuscitation efforts. Elena Martinez was pronounced dead at Denver General Hospital. Jake and I stayed with the family while Dr. Foster explained what had happened and discussed next steps. The cause of Elena's cardiac arrest remained unclear, and an autopsy would be required to determine why an apparently healthy 28-year-old woman had died suddenly in her sleep. The family was devastated, as anyone would expect, struggling to understand how someone so young and healthy could simply not wake up one morning. We completed our paperwork and restocked our ambulance, then returned to Station 7 around 3 a.m. These calls always affect you, especially when the patient is young and the outcome is unsuccessful. Jake and I debriefed about the call, discussing whether there was anything we could have done differently. But we both knew that Elena's extended downtime had made survival extremely unlikely from the moment we arrived. What I didn't know that night was that Elena Martinez's story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning in ways that would challenge everything I thought I understood about the boundary between life and death. The rest of my shift passed uneventfully. Jake and I ran 2 more calls before our replacement crew arrived at 7 a.m. A homeless man with hypothermia and an elderly woman who had fallen getting out of bed. Routine stuff that helped take my mind off Elena Martinez and her family's grief. I went home to my apartment near downtown, took a long shower, and tried to sleep off the emotional weight of losing such a young patient. I had been asleep for maybe 3 hours when my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed it was Jake, which was unusual since we rarely contacted each other outside of work, unless there was something important happening with scheduling or department news. "Sarah, you need to turn on Channel 9 News right now," Jake said without any greeting. His voice had an urgency that immediately got my attention. "What's going on?" I asked, reaching for my TV remote. "Just turn it on. They're doing a story about Elena Martinez." I found the local news channel and saw a reporter standing outside Denver General Hospital. The banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Medical Mystery, Woman Declared Dead Returns to Life." My stomach dropped as I turned up the volume. "This morning, Denver General Hospital is calling it unprecedented," the reporter was saying. Elena Martinez, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator, was pronounced dead early this morning after paramedics and emergency room staff were unable to revive her following cardiac arrest. But just hours later, hospital staff discovered something that has left medical professionals baffled. The camera cut to an interview with Dr. Foster, the same emergency physician who had worked on Elena during our transport. She looked tired and confused, clearly struggling with what she was about to say on camera. At approximately 4:30 this morning, one of our nurses went to prepare the body for transfer to the morgue, Dr. Foster explained. When she entered the room, she discovered that the patient was breathing and had a detectable pulse. We immediately began monitoring her vital signs, and I can confirm that Elena Martinez is currently alive and in stable condition. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and trying to process what I was hearing. People don't just come back from the dead. It doesn't happen. In 8 years of emergency medical services, I had worked dozens of cardiac arrests, and once someone is pronounced dead by a physician, that's the end of the story. "Jake, are you watching this?" I asked into the phone. "Yeah, I'm seeing it, but I don't believe it." We worked on her for almost 2 hours. She was flatlined the entire time. No pulse, no respirations, pupils fixed and dilated. She was dead, Sarah, medically, legally, completely dead. The news report continued with an interview with Elena's father, Robert Martinez. He was standing outside the hospital with tears streaming down his face, but these were tears of joy rather than grief. "It's a miracle," he kept saying. "God gave us our daughter back. The doctors can't explain it, but Elena is alive. She's talking, she's breathing on her own, and she remembers everything up until she went to sleep last night." The reporter mentioned that hospital administrators had called in specialists from the University of Colorado Medical Center and were conducting extensive testing to try to understand what had happened. They emphasized that cases like this were extremely rare in medical literature and that Elena's recovery was being thoroughly documented for potential publication in medical journals. After the news report ended, Jake and I stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes trying to make sense of what we had just seen. We went through every detail of the call, every intervention we had performed, every medication Jake had administered. There was no medical explanation for how someone could be in a systole for over 2 hours, be pronounced dead by an experienced emergency physician, and then spontaneously return to life with normal vital signs and cognitive function. "Do you think we missed something?" I asked. "Could there have been a pulse that we didn't detect?" "No way," Jake replied firmly. "I checked multiple times with my fingers and with the monitor." Dr. Foster checked too, along with 2 other physicians and at least 3 nurses. "She was dead, Sarah. No pulse, no respiratory effort, no response to painful stimuli. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, which happens when the brain stops functioning. But people don't just resurrect themselves," I said, more to myself than to Jake. "There has to be a medical explanation. Maybe there is, but I don't know what it would be. In 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen anything even remotely similar." I spent the rest of that day researching cases of spontaneous recovery after death. The medical term is Lazarus syndrome, named after the biblical figure who was raised from the dead. But these cases are incredibly rare, usually involving very short periods between death and recovery, and often have underlying medical explanations like drug interactions or undetected hypothermia. What made Elena's case different was the extended time frame and the complete absence of any obvious medical cause. She had been down for potentially 4 to 6 hours total, had received extensive resuscitation efforts from both pre-hospital and hospital teams, and had been declared dead by multiple medical professionals. Then, nearly 3 hours after being pronounced dead, she had simply started breathing again. Over the next few days, the story gained national attention. Medical experts from across the country were interviewed on news programs, offering various theories about what might have happened. Some suggested rare metabolic disorders that could cause a death-like state. Others proposed that Elena might have been in an extremely deep coma that mimicked death but wasn't actually fatal. But none of these explanations satisfied the medical professionals who had been directly involved in Elena's case. Dr. Foster gave several interviews where she maintained that Elena had been clinically dead by every standard measure used in modern medicine. The hospital released Elena's EKG strips, showing prolonged asystole, and medical reviewers confirmed that proper protocols had been followed. A week after the incident, I was working another shift with Jake when we received a call that would change everything I thought I knew about Elena Martinez and what had happened that night. We were dispatched to a routine medical transport, picking up an elderly patient from a nursing home for a dialysis appointment. Nothing unusual about the call itself, but as we were loading our patient into the ambulance, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was simple, but disturbing. "You need to know the truth about Elena Martinez. Meet me at Confluence Park tomorrow at 6 p.m. Come alone. Don't tell anyone about this message." I stared at the text for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. My first instinct was to delete it and forget about it. Anonymous messages about mysterious medical cases sounded like the kind of thing that leads to trouble. But my curiosity about Elena's case had been eating at me for days, and the possibility of getting answers was too tempting to ignore. The next day was my day off, and I found myself driving to Confluence Park despite every rational voice in my head telling me it was a bad idea. Confluence Park is a popular recreation area where the South Platte River and Cherry Creek meet in downtown Denver. On a Tuesday afternoon in March, it wasn't crowded, just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the unusually warm weather. I sat on a bench near the river, checking my watch every few minutes and wondering if this was all some kind of elaborate prank. At exactly 2:30 p.m., a woman approached my bench. She appeared to be in her 40s, professionally dressed in a dark suit, with short brown hair and an expression that suggested she took whatever she was about to tell me very seriously. "Sarah Chen?" she asked, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Lisa Brennan, and I'm a forensic pathologist with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation." I shook her hand, immediately more interested and more concerned about what she might have to say. "How do you know who I am, and what does this have to do with Elena Martinez?" Dr. Brennan sat down beside me on the bench and pulled out a manila folder. "I know who you are because I've been investigating Elena's case since the day after her reported death and resurrection. What I'm about to tell you isn't public information yet, and it may never be if certain people have their way." She opened the folder and handed me several documents. The first was a death certificate for Elena Martinez, dated 3 days before the night Jake and I had responded to the call at her family's house. "That's impossible," I said, scanning the document. "We transported Elena on March 3rd. This death certificate is dated February 29th. "Keep reading," Dr. Brennan said quietly. The death certificate indicated that Elena Martinez had died at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital following complications from a surgical procedure. The cause of death was listed as massive hemorrhage during what should have been routine gallbladder surgery. But the most disturbing detail was the signature at the bottom of the document. It had been signed by Dr. Michael Torres, a pathologist I recognize because he occasionally worked shifts at Denver General. "Dr. Brennan, I don't understand what this means. Are you saying there were 2 different Elena Martinez cases?" "No," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying there was only one Elena Martinez, and she died 4 days before you and your partner ever received that call." I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the death certificate. The letterhead was authentic, the signatures looked genuine, and every detail matched what I knew about Elena Martinez, except for one impossible fact. According to this document, she had been dead for 4 days before Jake and I ever set foot in that house on Maple Street. "This has to be some kind of mistake," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Maybe it's a different Elena Martinez. It's not that uncommon of a name." Dr. Brennan handed me another document from her folder. It was a photocopy of Elena's driver's license, clearly showing the same face I had seen on that bed, the same address where we had responded to the call. Below that was a hospital bracelet from Presbyterian St. Joseph with Elena's full name, date of birth, and patient identification number. "I wish it was that simple," Dr. Brennan said. "But I verified every detail. Fingerprints, dental records, DNA samples. The Elena Martinez who died during surgery on February 29th is the same Elena Martinez your family found in that bedroom on March 3rd. My hands were trembling now as I tried to process what she was telling me. "That's medically impossible. People don't die and then show up alive in their family's house 4 days later. No, they don't. Which is why I've been investigating this case. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I need you to hear me out completely before you decide I'm crazy." I nodded, though part of me wanted to get up and walk away from whatever rabbit hole I was about to go down. "Elena Martinez did die during surgery on February 29th, Dr. Brennan continued. The surgical team at Presbyterian tried for over an hour to control the bleeding, but she had suffered damage to her hepatic artery that they couldn't repair. She was pronounced dead at 3:47 p.m. by Dr. Richard Hawthorne, the chief of surgery." "Then who was in that house?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. Elena's body was supposed to be transferred to the county morgue the following morning for autopsy, since any death during surgery requires investigation. But when the transport team arrived at Presbyterian, Elena's body was missing." Dr. Brennan handed me another document. This one an incident report from Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital security. It detailed how Elena Martinez's body had disappeared from the hospital morgue sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. On March 1st, security cameras in the morgue had malfunctioned during that time period, showing only static footage for nearly 6 hours. The hospital administration tried to keep this quiet, Dr. Brennan explained. Missing bodies are extremely rare and create all kinds of legal and ethical problems. They launched an internal investigation, but before they could make any progress, Elena Martinez was suddenly alive again at Denver General Hospital. So you think someone stole her body from the morgue and then somehow made her appear alive at her family's house? That's one theory, but it doesn't explain how she could be responsive, talking, breathing, with normal vital signs. You can't make a dead body come back to life, no matter what kind of technology or drugs you use. I thought about that night at Denver General, remembering how Dr. Foster had described finding Elena breathing with a detectable pulse. But Dr. Foster said Elena was talking to her family, answering questions appropriately. She recognized everyone and seemed completely normal except for not remembering the past few days. Which brings me to the really disturbing part of this investigation, Dr. Brennan said. I've been looking into Elena's family background, and what I found raises some serious questions about who these people really are. She pulled out several more documents from her folder. The first was a property record for the house on Maple Street. According to the county assessor's office, the property had been purchased with cash just 6 months earlier by Robert Martinez. But when Dr. Brennan had tried to trace Robert's background, she had hit multiple dead ends. Robert Martinez doesn't have a credit history prior to 2023, she explained. No employment records, no previous addresses, no tax returns. It's as if he didn't exist before last year. Same thing with his wife Carmen and their son Diego. They all have social security numbers and identification documents, but no verifiable history beyond about 18 months ago. Maybe they immigrated recently, I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it didn't explain everything. I thought about that too, but there are no immigration records either, no visas, no naturalization documents, nothing. These people appeared in the system fully formed with complete identities, but no past. Dr. Brennan showed me photographs she had taken during her investigation. Pictures of the Martinez family at various locations around Denver over the past 6 months. Robert at a grocery store, Carmen at a medical appointment, Diego at what appeared to be a high school. But in every photo, there was something unsettling about their expressions and body language. Look at their faces in these pictures, Dr. Brennan said. Do you notice anything unusual? I studied the photographs carefully. At first glance, they looked like a normal family going about their daily routines. But as I looked more closely, I began to see what Dr. Brennan was referring to. In every single photo, all 3 family members had the same distant, almost vacant expression. Their eyes seemed to be looking through the camera rather than at it, and their faces showed no emotion despite being engaged in normal activities. They look like they're sleepwalking, I said. That's exactly what I thought. And here's the strangest part. I've been conducting surveillance on the house on Maple Street for the past week, and the Martinez family hasn't been seen entering or leaving the property. The house appears to be completely empty. What do you mean empty? Where did they go? I don't know. After Elena was discharged from Denver General, the family simply vanished. No forwarding address, no contact with neighbors, no activity on their credit cards or bank accounts. It's as if they served their purpose and then disappeared. The implications of what Dr. Brennan was suggesting began to sink in. Are you saying that Elena's entire family was somehow fake? That this was all some kind of elaborate setup? I'm saying that nothing about this case makes sense from a medical or legal standpoint. A woman dies during surgery, her body disappears from a hospital morgue, she appears alive at a house owned by people with no verifiable identities, and then the entire family vanishes after she's discharged from the hospital. I thought about that night, trying to remember every detail of our interaction with the Martinez family. Robert's desperate plea for help, the teenager performing CPR, the mother crying on the couch. It had all seemed so genuine, so authentic in the moment. But Jake and I saw Elena die, I said. We worked on her for almost 2 hours. Dr. Foster pronounced her dead. How do you fake that? That's what I can't figure out. Every medical professional involved insists that Elena was clinically dead by every measurable standard. But 3 hours later, she was alive and responsive. It defies everything we know about biology and medicine. Dr. Brennan closed her folder and looked directly at me. Sarah, I think you and your partner stumbled into something much larger and more complex than a medical mystery. I believe Elena Martinez was being used as part of some kind of experiment or demonstration, and her family were actors playing roles in an elaborate scenario. An experiment? By who? For what purpose? I don't know yet, but I have some theories. There are research programs, both government and private, that study consciousness, death, and the possibility of life after clinical death. Most of this research is highly classified and operates outside normal medical oversight. The idea that Elena Martinez had been some kind of test subject in a secret research program was terrifying to consider. But why involve paramedics and hospital staff? Why make it so public? Maybe because they needed independent medical professionals to witness and document what happened. Think about it. If you're trying to prove that you can bring someone back from clinical death, you need credible witnesses who can testify that the person was actually dead. And then what? They just let Elena go back to her normal life? Dr. Brennan's expression grew even more serious. I don't think Elena Martinez has a normal life to go back to. Based on everything I've found, I don't think she's the same person who died during surgery on February 29th. What do you mean? I mean that whoever was discharged from Denver General Hospital might look like Elena Martinez and have her memories, but I don't believe it's actually her. I think someone or some organization has developed technology that can create perfect human replicas. And they used Elena's case to test their capabilities. The conversation was veering into science fiction territory. But everything Dr. Brennan had shown me suggested that something far beyond normal medical understanding had occurred. So what happened to the real Elena Martinez? I think she's still dead, Sarah. I think her body was taken from Presbyterian's morgue to be used in this experiment, and what we all witnessed was some kind of advanced bioengineering or consciousness transfer technology. We sat in silence for several minutes while I tried to process everything she had told me. The warm afternoon sun felt surreal against the backdrop of our conversation about death, missing bodies, and impossible medical resurrections. Dr. Brennan, why are you telling me all this? And why did you want to meet secretly instead of going through official channels? Because I think my investigation is being monitored and potentially compromised. 2 days ago, I received a visit from federal agents who strongly suggested that I drop my inquiry into Elena Martinez's case. They claimed it was a matter of national security and that continued investigation could jeopardize ongoing operations. Did they give you any details about what kind of operations? No, but they made it clear that I was getting close to something I wasn't supposed to fin one of the paramedics who worked on Elena. You'd. That's when I decided to reach out to you, as you're a key witness to what happened. If something happens to me or my investigation disappears, I need someone else who knows the truth. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. What do you want me to do? For now, just be aware of what really happened that night. Keep copies of all your documentation from the call. And if anyone contacts you asking questions about Elena Martinez, be very careful about how much you reveal. Dr. Brennan stood up from the bench and handed me her business card along with copies of all the documents she had shown me. My direct phone number is on the back of that card. If you notice anything unusual, any contacts from people asking about Elena, or if you remember any details from that night that seemed strange, call me immediately. What about Jake? Should I tell him about this conversation? Not yet. The fewer people who know about my investigation, the safer everyone involved will be. If this situation escalates, I may need to bring him in, but for now, keep this between us. As Dr. Brennan walked away, I remained on the bench for another hour, staring at the documents and trying to decide what I believed. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything she had told me as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. But the death certificate, the property records, and the missing body report were all official documents that painted a picture far more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. That evening, I called Jake to see if he wanted to grab dinner and discuss our recent calls. I needed to talk to someone about what I was feeling, even if I couldn't share the details of my conversation with Dr. Brennan. You know, I've been thinking about the Elena Martinez case, Jake said over pizza at our usual spot near the station. Something about that whole situation has been bothering me. What do you mean? I keep going over the medical details in my head, and there are things that don't add up. When we arrived at the house, the family said Elena had been down since around 7 p.m., but her body temperature wasn't nearly as low as it should have been after 4 hours. I had noticed the same thing, but hadn't thought much about it at the time. Maybe the house was really warm, or she was under heavy blankets. Maybe, but there's something else. When I was ventilating her with the bag mask before we intubated, her lungs felt normal. Usually when someone has been in cardiac arrest for hours, you get significant stiffening of the chest wall and difficulty ventilating. Elena's lungs felt like those of someone who had just gone into arrest. You think she hadn't been down as long as the family claimed? I think there was something about that whole call that we're not understanding. The family's behavior, the medical presentation, even the way Elena looked when we found her. It all felt somehow staged. Jake's observations aligned perfectly with what Dr. Brennan had suggested about the Martinez family being actors in an elaborate scenario. But I couldn't reveal what I knew without putting both of us in potential danger. Have you heard anything more about Elena's condition? I asked. That's another weird thing. I called Denver General yesterday to check on her status for my continuing education records, and they told me there was no record of Elena Martinez ever being a patient there. My blood went cold. What do you mean, no record? The charge nurse I spoke with said they had no Elena Martinez in their system, matching the date and details I provided. She suggested I might have the wrong hospital or the wrong name. But we transported her there. Dr. Foster worked on her. There were dozens of hospital staff involved in her care. I know, but according to their official records, it never happened. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jake and I had both been there. We had documentation, patient care reports, radio communications with dispatch. You can't just erase an entire medical emergency response from existence. Jake, that's impossible. We have copies of our PCR, the dispatch logs, everything. That's what I thought too, so I went back to the station and pulled our paperwork from that night. Sarah, our patient care report for Elena Martinez is gone. Not just missing, but completely absent from the system. According to our electronic records, we only ran 5 calls that night, not 6. I felt the room start to spin slightly. Someone deleted our documentation? It looks that way. And when I asked our supervisor about it, he said he didn't recall us running any call to Maple Street that night. He looked at me like I was losing my mind. The systematic erasure of Elena's case from official records was exactly what Dr. Brennan had warned me about. Someone with significant resources and authority was covering up everything related to Elena Martinez, and they were doing it so thoroughly that even the people directly involved were being made to question their own memories. Do you have any personal copies of the paperwork? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I always keep backup copies of unusual calls on my personal laptop, but when I checked last night, those files were corrupted. Every single document related to Elena Martinez shows up as damaged and unreadable. This was getting more frightening by the hour. Whoever was behind Elena's case had the capability to access and manipulate not just hospital records, but ambulance service databases and personal computer files. The scope of their operation was far beyond anything I had imagined. Jake, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Do you remember anything unusual about the Martinez family that night? Anything that seemed off or strange about their behavior? Jake was quiet for several minutes, staring at his pizza while he considered the question. You know, now that you mention it, there was something. When we were working on Elena, the family was obviously upset, but their reactions seemed almost performative, like they were showing the appropriate emotions rather than actually feeling them. What do you mean? The father was pacing and wringing his hands, the mother was crying, the brother was doing CPR, all the right responses for a family in crisis. But when I looked at their faces, there was something hollow about their expressions, almost like they were actors who had studied how grieving families should behave, but couldn't quite capture the genuine emotion. Jake's observations were becoming more detailed and specific, which meant he was starting to remember things that had seemed unimportant at the time, but now felt significant. And another thing, he continued. When we loaded Elena into the ambulance, the father asked to ride along, which is normal. But during the entire transport to the hospital, he never once asked about her condition or prognosis. Most family members can't stop asking questions about what we're doing and whether their loved one is going to survive. This guy just sat quietly in the passenger seat like he already knew the outcome. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Jake, what if I told you there might be more to Elena's case than we realized? What if the medical mystery everyone's been talking about isn't actually a mystery at all? What are you getting at? I was walking a dangerous line. Dr. Brennan had warned me about revealing too much too soon, but Jake was my partner and had as much right to know the truth as anyone. Plus, if our documentation was being systematically erased, he was potentially in danger, whether he knew it or not. I've been doing some research into Elena's background, I said carefully. There are some inconsistencies in the official story that don't make medical sense. What kind of inconsistencies? The kind that suggest Elena Martinez might not have been who we thought she was. Jake leaned forward across the table, his expression growing more serious. Sarah, are you saying this whole thing was some kind of setup? I'm saying that nothing about that night was what it appeared to be. The family, the patient, the medical emergency, maybe even Elena's recovery at the hospital. All of it might have been orchestrated. Orchestrated by who, and for what purpose? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the message made my heart race. Stop asking questions about Elena Martinez. This is your only warning. I showed the text to Jake, whose face immediately went pale. Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into? I don't know, but I think we're both in it now. We left the restaurant and drove to Jake's apartment, both of us checking our mirrors repeatedly to make sure we weren't being followed. Once inside, Jake poured 2 glasses of bourbon, and we sat in his living room trying to figure out what to do next. Okay, tell me everything, Jake said. What do you know about Elena Martinez that I don't? I spent the next hour walking Jake through my conversation with Dr. Brennan, showing him copies of the documents she had given me. His reactions mirrored my own, progressing from disbelief to confusion to growing alarm as the evidence mounted. So you're telling me that Elena Martinez died in surgery 4 days before we ever met her. Her body disappeared from a hospital morgue, and her entire family consists of people with fabricated identities? That's what the evidence suggests. And whoever is behind this has the power to erase medical records, manipulate computer files, and make federal agents appear when people ask too many questions? It looks that way. Jake finished his bourbon in one swallow and poured another. Sarah, this is way beyond anything we should be involved in. If there's some kind of government program or private research operation using fake identities and stolen bodies, we need to stay as far away from it as possible. But we're already involved. We were there that night. We're witnesses to whatever they did to Elena. And now they're trying to erase all evidence that it ever happened. Which is exactly why we should let them. If they want to pretend Elena Martinez never existed, fine. We go back to running normal calls and forget this ever happened. Jake, what if there are other cases? What if Elena wasn't the first person they've experimented on? How many other families have received calls about loved ones who were already dead? The possibility that Elena's case was part of a larger pattern of similar experiments was terrifying to consider. If Dr. Brennan was right about advanced bioengineering or consciousness transfer technology, there could be dozens or hundreds of other cases that had been covered up just as thoroughly. Even if that's true, what can we do about it? We're paramedics, not federal investigators. We don't have the resources or authority to take on some kind of covert research program. Jake was being practical, but I couldn't shake the feeling that walking away would make us complicit in whatever was happening. Dr. Brennan said she needed witnesses who could testify about what they saw. Maybe that's our role in this. Testify to who? If federal agents are telling people to drop their investigations, who's going to listen to a couple of EMTs claiming they transported a dead person who came back to life? Before I could answer, the lights in Jake's apartment went out. We sat in complete darkness for several seconds, listening to the silence and wondering if the power outage was a coincidence or something more sinister. Jake, do you have a flashlight? In the kitchen drawer, he whispered back. We felt our way through the apartment until Jake found a flashlight and clicked it on. The beam illuminated his kitchen, but everything appeared normal. No signs of forced entry or disturbance. Could be just a power outage, Jake said, though his voice suggested he didn't believe it. I walked to the living room window and looked outside. The streetlights were on, and I could see lights in the windows of neighboring apartments. Jake, I think the power's only out in your unit. We checked the circuit breaker panel, but all the switches were in their normal positions. The power to Jake's apartment had been cut from outside the building, which required either access to utility equipment or sophisticated electronic interference. We need to get out of here, I said. Jake grabbed his keys and wallet while I gathered up the documents Dr. Brennan had given me. We left through the back door of his apartment building and walked quickly to where I had parked my car several blocks away. Where should we go? Jake asked as we drove through downtown Denver. Somewhere public with lots of people, a hotel lobby or a 24-hour restaurant. We ended up at an all-night diner near the airport, taking a booth in the back where we could see anyone who entered the restaurant. The fluorescent lighting and constant background noise of kitchen activity felt reassuring after the darkness and silence of Jake's apartment. This is insane, Jake said, ordering coffee from a tired-looking waitress. 2 days ago, I was a paramedic with a normal job running routine medical calls. Now I'm sitting in a diner at midnight because someone cut the power to my apartment after I started asking questions about a patient who might not have been real. Jake, I know this sounds crazy, but I think we need to contact Dr. Brennan and tell her what's happening. The fact that someone is actively trying to intimidate us means we're getting close to something important. Or it means we're about to disappear like Elena Martinez and her family did. I pulled out Dr. Brennan's business card and dialed her direct number. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Her recorded message was brief and professional, asking callers to leave a detailed message and promising to return calls within 24 hours. Dr. Brennan, this is Sarah Chen. Jake and I have been threatened and intimidated since our conversation yesterday. Someone erased our documentation from the Elena Martinez call and cut the power to Jake's apartment. We need to talk as soon as possible. After leaving the message, Jake and I spent the next 2 hours discussing our options. We could try to return to our normal lives and pretend nothing had happened, but the systematic erasure of evidence suggested that wouldn't be enough to satisfy whoever was behind Elena's case. We could go to local police, but if federal agents were involved, local law enforcement might not be able to help. Or we could continue investigating and risk whatever consequences that might bring. There's one thing that's been bothering me, Jake said around 3:00 a.m. If Elena Martinez really died during surgery and her body was stolen for some kind of experiment, why did they need us to respond to a fake emergency call? Dr. Brennan thought it was to create independent medical witnesses who could verify that Elena was actually dead. But we didn't witness her death. We witnessed her cardiac arrest and our failed resuscitation attempts. For all we knew at the time, she could have been in arrest for minutes instead of hours. Jake was right. Our role in the scenario hadn't been to witness Elena's death, but to provide credible medical testimony about her condition when we found her. Maybe they needed paramedics to document that she was in prolonged cardiac arrest with no response to advanced life support, which would make her subsequent recovery even more medically impossible and impressive. Exactly. If 2 experienced EMTs work on someone for 2 hours using every available intervention and can't get them back, then their spontaneous recovery becomes a genuine miracle that defies medical explanation. So we were basically props in a demonstration designed to prove that someone had developed technology capable of bringing people back from the dead. The implications were staggering. If that was true, then Elena's case wasn't just about one person or one experiment. It was a proof of concept for technology that could fundamentally change humanity's relationship with death and dying. Jake, what if this isn't just about research? What if someone has developed the ability to actually resurrect the dead and they're planning to use it commercially or militarily? You mean like bringing back dead soldiers or creating armies of people who can't be killed? Or selling immortality to the highest bidders? Think about how much someone would pay for the guarantee that they could come back from any injury or illness. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us trying to process the scope of what we might have stumbled into. The technology Dr. Brennan had theorized about wasn't just scientifically revolutionary, it was potentially world-changing in ways that could affect every aspect of human society. My phone rang at 4:15 a.m., The caller ID showed Dr. Brennan's number. Sarah, I got your message. Are you and Jake somewhere safe? We're at a diner near the airport. Dr. Brennan, someone's actively trying to intimidate us. They erased our documentation and cut power to Jake's apartment. That means my investigation has triggered some kind of response protocol. Listen carefully. I need you both to disappear for the next few days while I figure out how to protect you. Disappear? We have jobs, responsibilities. I can't just vanish. Sarah, these people have demonstrated that they can manipulate official records and make entire families disappear. If they decide you're a threat, your jobs and responsibilities won't matter. What about you? Are you safe? Like, for now, but I'm not sure for how long. There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Elena Martinez wasn't the first case like this that I've investigated. Over the past 2 years, there have been at least 6 similar incidents across Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. 6 other people who died and came back to life. 6 other people who died in hospitals had their bodies disappear from morgues and then were found alive by family members who called 911. In each case, paramedics and emergency room staff worked extensive resuscitation efforts before the patients were pronounced dead. And in each case, the patient spontaneously recovered hours later with no medical explanation. What happened to those patients and families? They all disappeared within days of being discharged from hospitals. No forwarding addresses, no contact with friends or employers, no electronic footprints. It's like they were erased from existence after serving their purpose in these demonstrations. The pattern Dr. Brennan was describing suggested a systematic program of human experimentation that had been operating for years. Elena Martinez hadn't been a one-time test, but part of an ongoing research project that was using stolen bodies and fake families to perfect technology for bringing people back from the dead. Dr. Brennan, we need to expose this. People need to know what's happening. I've been trying, but every time I get close to publishing my findings or contacting media outlets, my evidence disappears or becomes discredited. These people have resources and connections that go all the way to the top of government and medical institutions. So what do we do? Right now, you and Jake need to get out of Colorado. Drive to a different state, pay cash for everything, and don't use your credit cards or phones. I'm going to try to get this information to someone who can't be intimidated or silenced. How will we know if you're successful? If I can get this story out, it'll be all over the news within 48 hours. If you don't hear anything by then, assume that I've been stopped and that you need to stay hidden indefinitely. The call ended, leaving Jake and me sitting in a nearly empty diner at dawn, trying to decide whether to run or fight. Everything we thought we knew about our careers, our community, and our understanding of life and death had been shattered in the span of a few days. So what do you think? Jake asked. Do we disappear like she suggested, or do we try to go back to our normal lives? I looked out the window at the sunrise, painting the sky pink and orange above the mountains. Somewhere out there, people were waking up to start ordinary days, completely unaware that technology existed that could bring the dead back to life. They deserved to know the truth, even if it meant Jake and I had to sacrifice our safety to make sure they learned it. I think we owe it to Elena Martinez and all the other victims to make sure this story gets told, I said, even if it costs us everything. Jake nodded slowly. Then we'd better figure out how to stay alive long enough to tell it. That was 3 months ago. Jake and I spent 6 weeks moving from state to state, paying cash for everything and watching the news obsessively for any sign that Dr. Brennan had managed to expose what we discovered. The story never broke. Instead, we saw a brief news report about a forensic pathologist from Colorado who had died in a car accident on a mountain highway. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses, ruled accidental by state investigators. Dr. Brennan's death convinced us that staying hidden was our only chance of survival. Jake found work as a security guard in Arizona under an assumed name. I moved to a small town in Oregon where I stock shelves at a grocery store and try not to think about the 8 years I spent saving lives as a paramedic. We don't contact each other anymore. It's safer that way. Sometimes I wonder if Elena Martinez is still out there somewhere, living a life with memories that aren't entirely her own. Or maybe she really did die that day in surgery, and what we witnessed was something else entirely. The truth is, I'll probably never know for certain what happened that night on Maple Street. What I do know is that there are forces in this world with capabilities far beyond anything most people can imagine. And sometimes, when you stumble across their work, the only choice you have is to walk away and pray they let you keep walking.